Hello. Oh, pardon me just a second. Knew I'd forgotten something. I forgot to take the cover off the microphone. Hello, friends. Welcome back to a 1D10T Does Stuff, and I'm the idiot in charge, Trevor Stewart 1308. Obviously, a little unprepared for today, but mostly here. Today's pre-rolls brought to you in association with The Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, 105 West Main Street, and the Smoking Lounge at Sky Mall, 105 West Main Street, Suite 200, above the bricks. I've almost got it. A great place to go with some great buds for some great buds. Bud? Only thing better than their bud is their customer service, and they have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personally highly biased research, by which I mean I was incredibly high when I did my personally biased research. We are also brought to you in association with Kush Gang Snacks, purveyors of fine edibles and drinkables, KG Snacks 434 on Instagram, and Firehouse Organics, spelled with a Z, findable at Firehouse Organics on Instagram. A note of disclaimer: I will be expressing some opinions throughout the day, plus we are reading some pretty strong stuff here and discussing some pretty difficult topics. So, through all of this, none of those opinions are necessarily associated with any of my advertisers, including Hidden Leaf, Sky Mall VA, Kush Gang Snacks, and Firehouse Organics. Alright, I need to figure that ad read out better, write it down, and work on actually memorizing it. I'm stumbling my way through it each time, but I'm getting there. Hi, Just Me Crystal. Great to see you. Thank you for being here. And we will be reading from Fearing the Black Body, reading from and discussing Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings, as we have been doing for a while now, and yeah, it's been a little while since we've done this. I believe I took last week off. I took last week off of a lot of things. So, just to sort of refresh our memory, what we have been talking about so far is the evolution of the beauty aesthetic. Now, this has also specifically been the beauty aesthetic in very specific places at very specific times. Although I do feel like the author has done a bit to sort of expand that and say, point out that it was around other places too. That the beauty, the ideas around what constituted beautiful were not just they were started in certain places, but they spread throughout Europe and into the colonies and the colonized and conquered areas. Although by nature of sort of the type of narrative being told here, it's hard to concentrate on the larger world, sort of taking snapshots of places and times. That's not fair. There's more of a chronology here. But specifically, it is the concept of beauty standards that has led us to where we are in the United States at the moment, and the tracing of beauty standards that have turned into global health standards. And that's really sort of what we're trying to track, is where current health standards come from. So that's what we've been sort of looking at. That's the lens through which we've been reading this book. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. Now, in general, our Tuesday streams are with an eye towards what we're really trying to look at is the racism and sexism inherent in the medical institutions of the United States. So why this is helpful is because this book is giving us a background on how we got to the standards that the medical institutions use. There's a lot of other information in this book. There's a lot of, the what it's saying is really important in a lot of different ways. What we have specifically been looking for is the racism and sexism inherent in the current medical standards. We're absolutely against fat phobia. And it is helpful to understand that fat phobia has racial origins. Has not just racial, but racist origins. But that's also not that's not what we're specifically looking for. Although fat phobia is a good sort of segue into health standards, because it is so closely linked with health. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. Well, all right. Let's go ahead and flip the book open and get started. We are currently we have made it from Europe from Europe through England into the Americas. We're there. Make that a bit easier for everybody to see, eh? Yes, we have made it from Europe through England into the Americas, and we have watched the beauty standards we have watched the beauty standards really tend towards whiteness, and tend towards whiteness in a way that let's see. In a way that positions slimness close to whiteness. Fatness is more closely linked to blackness. There is, yeah. And now that we are in America, we are, I believe we're really starting to see it. I believe we're about to see it ratchet up. Now, a lot of these, oh, phone, don't fail me now, phone. Yeah, I also think that what we're gonna see is, again, more linking of masculinity. Well, I don't know. I don't remember if that's in this book or in other books. But the sort of masculinizing black women and feminizing black men, to take them further away from the white ideal. I don't remember if that's in this book or not. So, but we won't know unless we move on. All right, here we go. We're gonna back up a paragraph and get a running start, as we always do. Something that sort of came to the surface in the last chapter was this idea, or in the last few episodes, during this last chapter, was the idea of the Anglo-Saxon people, of the specifically British white people, race, almost, and how that's supposed to be sort of the, sort of at the top of the hierarchy, the racial hierarchy. And yeah. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. Make sure you've got something comfy to drink, a nice warm blunt to smoke, and something delicious to sit on. Let's dive in. Therefore, while English and American Anglo-Saxons were supposedly blood brethren sitting atop the racial hierarchy, the Americans were noted for their spare form. They were just speaking about how even between American Anglo-Saxons and British Anglo-Saxons, Americans were even more svelte, skinny, and proper white. It is worth noting that if Emerson, Ralph Waldo, was a tall and thin man, Carlyle too was described as Reedy, stooped 6-footer. Nevertheless, the racial lore of the time suggested that the English were a stouter breed of Anglo-Saxon than the Americans. By the mid-19th century, this supposed general spareness of constitution, especially among women, would become a basis for extolling native-born Anglo-Saxon Protestant American women. Sarah Hale had taken over the editorship of Godey's Lady's Book in the midst of the massive transformations in American religious and racial identity after 1836. After 1836, both Hale and the magazine reflected the times. As early as 1830, Godey's Lady's Book had spoken the language of temperance, urging women to curtail the amount they ate and in the interest of God, health, and beauty. Upon the arrival of Hale some 6 years later, Godey's expressed a growing concern about the racial propriety of fatness. So we're talking about 1842. The racial propriety of fatness. There it is. The year Hale arrived at Godey's, the magazine published an article describing the relationship between overeating, femininity, and race. The article titled Chapter on Female Features written by a woman named Leigh Hunt, reminded the reader that the pleasure of even eating and drinking to those who enjoy it with temperance may be traced beyond the palate. Hunt's aim was to inform the reader that although eating to satiety and beyond could be enjoyable, greater rewards were to be reaped by keeping the appetite in check. Even better than gratifying the appetite, Hunt suggests, is to eat with moderation so as to maintain one's appearance. Women of utmost refinement, Hunt intones, are far too frequently wide of the mark. Punning her way through the piece, Hunt makes it clear that excessive eating leads to a figure that would be undesirable for cultivated white women. With more than a hint of sarcasm, Hunt acknowledges that there are fashions in beauty as well as dress. With this, she's suggesting that other parts of the world, different standards of beauty apply. The place where fat women can be appreciated, it seems, is under the African sun, since in some parts of Africa no lady can be charming under 21 stone, or approximately 300 pounds. One of the authorities on beauty that Hunt relies on is in this essay is none other than Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. As it turns out, Lady Mary's capacity for witticism combined with her desire to convey scandal and underhanded slights sometimes made her an uneasy model for American women. Yet her views on women's education and beauty were printed again and again in Godey's, owing in no small measure to editor Hale's own reverence for her. Hale praised her in an issue of Godey's Ladies' Book, suggesting that Lady Mary's work, along with other great works from Great Britain, belongs to us, descendants of the Anglo-Saxons, as much as to the dwellers of that proud island. Hale would even translate a version of Lady Mary's letters in 1856. Between 1836 and 1874, at least 29 publications mentioned the inimitable Lady Mary, most revering her as an Anglo-Saxon foremother. If Lady Mary received her fair share of recognition in Godey's as a model for Anglo-Saxon women, Ralph Waldo Emerson was also acknowledged. Many of Emerson's poems were published in Godey's. His famed disquisitions against overindulgence also made an appearance. In an essay on Thanksgiving temperance penned by an author identifying only as SGB, both Carlyle's and Emerson's treatises against overfeeding were met with appreciation. It is not without some irony that Hale, a proponent of temperance, would become progenitor for the holiday most associated with overeating. SGB considered this a perversion of the idea behind Thanksgiving. She inquired about the superfluous fatty dishes that were its fare. What are mince pies made for? What enemy of mankind first prompted their consumption? What inventor of patent dyspepsia medicine brought into use these promoters of the disease he would pretend to cure? SGB seems convinced that eating such food stood in opposition to the Thanksgiving, and that the America that reformers like Hale were aiming towards. She cites Carlyle and Emerson as beacons in the move against decadence. SGB finds herself disgusted that mince pies stuffed with 3 fat chickens were going to be served on Thanksgiving, and that such gluttony had not been eradicated by the teachings of Carlyle or Emerson or any other destroyers of the old landmarks. While Anglo-Saxon women were often the focus of dietary reform, Irish women commonly were derided as irredeemably greedy and fat. Oh, hey, Jotzi and Dex. Hey, thanks for showing up. Right on. This is some heavy stuff. Vibe along at work, but this is some heavy stuff, so if it's a little too heavy to pay attention to while you're at work, I get that. We are talking about the racial origins of fat phobia, so thanks for being here. While Anglo-Saxon women were often the focus of dietary reform, Irish women were commonly derided as irredeemably greedy and fat. An article from 1848 titled Sketches from Real Life described a Mrs. Bridget Notable, an Irish domestic. Mrs. Notable's heft was indicative of both her race and her low class standing. According to the author, her stature is somewhat low and she's slightly inclined to embonpoint. We hate that word. We still hate that word. We are not happy with that word. Embonpoint is a French term for plump or fleshy, specifically of the cleavage, of the chest. Mrs. Notable's weight was, per the author, just enough so as to give her form and face that firm and massive texture which appears as if it could resist the wear and tear of almost any amount of labor. Another article makes it clear the anxiety surrounding the mere possibility that a boorish, fat Irish woman might somehow make her way into polite white society. The 1855 piece, The Fat Widow, describes the fear of an interracial relationship between a decent Scotchman and an older Irish woman. All right. From when I read this before, I have it labeled as, wow, that's a mean burn. Someone mentioned that a young Scotchman who had been lately in the neighborhood was about to marry an Irish widow double his age and of considerable dimensions. Going to marry her, he exclaimed, bursting out laughing. Going to marry her? Impossible. You mean a part of her. He could not marry her all himself. It would be a case not of bigamy, but of trigamy. The neighborhood or the magistrate should interfere. There is enough of her to furnish wives for the whole parish. One man marry her, it is monstrous. You might people a colony with her, or give an assembly with her, or perhaps take your morning's walk around her, always provided there were frequent resting places and you were in rude health. I once was rash enough to try walking around her before breakfast, but only got halfway and gave it up exhausted. Or you might read the riot act and disperse her. In short, you might do anything with her but marry her. That's cruel. That's all of the mean fat jokes, all of them like in one. And in this and dozens of other articles in Godey's, the fear of an Irish woman managing to filter into hollowed Anglo-American communities is palpable, and yet it is brushed off through callous humor, along with her race and age. The Irish widow's considerable dimensions make the pairing between her and the young Scotchman all the more preposterous. This helped to diffuse the sense of unease readers might have otherwise felt about the possibility of interracial mating during the height of Irish immigration to the United States. When Irish was considered to be not white, let's take a moment to remember how malleable the definition of white has been to the people in power. you know, white was for a time inclusive of only certain parts of Italy and north. And then for a time it was only north of Italy, only the northern parts of Europe or northeastern parts of Europe and England. And then it became only England. Well, England and Scotland, and all of a sudden Europe and even Ireland is not considered white, and the very idea of whiteness has been shrunk to this very specific thing, as it's been transferred across, to the Americas. And whiteness will again expand at some point, to be more inclusive. But there are certain things that, whether they're considered white or not, even when they are considered white, are very much at the edge of whiteness. Things like Catholicism is always sort of at the edge of whiteness. It's, even if you're white and a Catholic, the Catholicism can take away from the whiteness. Being Jewish, that's always at the edge. Being any religion other than Protestant, and one of the accepted Protestants too. Like, even some of the Protestant things are not white. They're not a white Protestant. So there's this very malleable, but also very sort of rigid at its core idea of whiteness that is gosh, where do I want to take this next sentence? That is both pervasive throughout the history, not only of this nation, but of the world since the inception of gross colonization / chattel slavery. But also based on a desire to maintain a power hierarchy that places white men at the top and maintains that power hierarchy for white men. So yeah, that's the, yeah. That's what this kernel of whiteness is doing, is from, I think. Hey, lockpick. Speaking of a kernel of whiteness, I'm kidding. Good to see you. Much love. The one thing I can say about you, Lockpick, is you don't do it to maintain a a male white hierarchy. Only half here? Okay. As long as it's the bottom half, I'm happy. Okay. I better move on. So, yeah, this is, this concept of whiteness, maintaining the power hierarchies. For the right price, I get to pick the half. Ooh. I'm not. Whatever I was about to say, I'm not going to say it. Can I get an extra discount? Because I only really need like 2 feet. It's about 2 feet, right? Moving on. I'm moving on. Editor Hale, for her part, was less likely to critique the gross excesses and heavy weights of either Anglo-Saxon or Irish women. Choosing instead the high road, Hale would often herald good Anglo-Saxon women as guides towards the new way. She had written essays and encyclopedia entries on the virtues of the Anglo-Saxon Protestant women. God's appointed agent of morality, per Hale. Thus, it may not be surprising that after Hale was hired at the magazine, the issue of race, especially racial superiority of Anglo-Saxons, was interwoven with narratives of morality, health, and beauty. It's not a foot fetish, it's a feet fetish. Gotta be more than one of them. I mean, I'm not really a size queen, but if you haven't got more than 2 feet, I'm not interested. Of course, I don't really want more than 2 feet. I just don't want less than 2 feet either. I can work with that. Again, I'm moving on. I gotta move on. Nope. In an 1843 edition of the Editor's Table, for instance, she presents Anglo-Saxon Protestant women as the source of the nation's morale and physical improvement. This is the age of action, she announces, adding that action must be taken to end the ignorance and indulgence that threatened our great country, appearing to reverse course on her previous position. The fashion plates were now going to be integral to, not a diversion from, reform. They were to batter the immoral excesses that fashion has elsewhere vaunted. I find that interesting. That moment when she goes, "Oh, wait. This could be a useful tool." Oops. Crucial to this reformation is changing the short and stout models of beauty, including the Venus de Medici, delivering a rare critique of the classical model of beauty as being too full. The author saves her praise for the erect, lank bodies of Anglo-Saxons. We make it our particular aim to show in our fashion plate the better as well as more beautiful effect of giving the natural forms of our female figures in that perfect development which nature shows in her best models among us, that these forms are not precisely what is termed classic, that is, short and full of the Medicean Venus, is the fault, if fault it be, of nature. The Anglo-Saxon race of women are taller and slenderer than were the Grecian females, and, if we may credit history, far more lovely. I just read what Lockpick wrote just a second ago, and that's why I'm laughing. They're not. You're not going to get better radio stations if you twist them harder. This view evidently contradicts that of many of the so-called Anglo-Saxon forebears to whom Hale often paid homage. Even Lady Mary had praised the Venus, holding her up as the standard by which true beauty could be measured. But in this editor's table article, the author suggests that the Athenian women were proverbially ugly in person and repulsive in manners. It was incumbent upon Anglo-Saxon women then to serve as the flag bearers for a new standard of beauty, one rooted in health and racial pride. What we most need, the author concludes, is to perfect our own system, in which we avow that delicacy must never be violated, health never sacrificed, and propriety never disregarded. The new standard of beauty Hale seemed to hope for, that of tall, slender, Anglo Saxon Protestant women, did arrive. It would come to be known in many New England circles as the American beauty. Gaudy's give me a second and I'll try that again. Godey's contributors would commonly describe this form of embonpoint as such. This much was to be seen in an article titled Le Mélange, American Beauty, in which the author claims there are 2 points in which it is seldom equaled, never excelled: the classic chasteness and delicacy of the features, and the smallness and exquisite symmetry of the extremities. In the latter respect, particularly the American ladies are singularly fortunate. The American beauty ideal was nevertheless fraught and contested, for although the author of this article, a British man, praised American women for their smallness, delicacy, and symmetry of figures, he nevertheless found them most deficient in roundness of figure. His assessment of American women's delicacy and smallness as divine, and yet perhaps taken a bit too far, reveals just how conflicted he and many other men and women, especially those who were not American, were with the burgeoning slender aesthetic of as an Anglo-Saxon Protestant American woman's ideal. And yet, the power of the slender aesthetic as an American beauty ideal lay in its repetition. Godey's was the earliest and most visible women's magazine to glorify an ideal rooted in the multiple and colliding factors of Protestant aestheticism, scientific racism, and the proto-science of health and beauty. In subsequent decades, however, it was to be one of many sources to promote the thin ideal. All right. Question for chat. Is it subsequent or subsequent? I've heard more and more people recently saying subsequent. People who I know are better educated than myself, saying subsequent. It looks like in the next section, we will be moving through the mid to late 19th century. you know, and as we do, we will see the racial tension of it coming into play, coming more and more to the front, I think. I think we're going to go ahead and keep going. I think we're going to try and get through 2 sections today. So, by the mid-19th century, new women's magazines were starting to take off, entering a competitive arena long dominated by Godey's Ladies' Book. The new publication sought to carve out a slice of the magazine's considerable market share for themselves. Learning from Louis Godey, they decided that they needed a woman editor to speak to women's issues. So when James John Fletcher and Joseph Wesley Harper, collectively known as Harper Brothers, decided after years of success in publishing business in the publishing business to diversify their holdings by launching a women's magazine, it seemed only natural that they bring on a woman as the first editor. Their new publication would be called Harper's Bazaar, spelled with one A in Bazaar at first, and the editor would be an established female author named Mary Louise Booth. Booth was born on Long Island in 1831 to the descendants of French immigrants who had escaped persecution during the French Revolution. Meaning they were rich. Booth had learned to read by the age of 5, and by her teens she had converted her affinity for the written word into a teaching position at a local school. A decade later, she resolved to put more time into writing and publishing her own works. In the 1850s, she took off for Manhattan, where she would quickly befriend the suffragette leader Susan B. Anthony, join the women's rights movements, and accept a freelance writing assignment with the New York Times. New York Times. By the time Harper and Brothers tapped her to become the editor of Harper's Bazaar in 1867, Booth had already made a name for herself in the big city. In addition to being an occasional writer for the New York Times, she had also translated several works on French language, history, and aesthetics. Mary Louise Booth had none of the reservations that prevented Hale from promoting fashionable dress in her early years as an editor. Booth had herself worked part-time as a seamstress when she first arrived in New York. From the earliest issues of Harper's Bazaar, she tried to answer the pressing question of how a lady of certain ethnic, racial, and economic position might properly present herself to society. And it's the ethnic, racial, and economic position part of that grabs the attention, and how that is going to interact with society. That's what we're interested in there. Within these queries and Harper's responses, concerns about diet and weight were equal to those regarding whether or not what? Let's try this sentence again. Within these queries and Harper's responses, concerns about diet and weight were equal to those regarding whether or not crinoline was still making a go of it. What's crinoline? What? Under Booth, Harper's Bazaar often addressed questions of how and how much a proper American lady should eat. A regular series titled For the Ugly Girls offered advice for those falling short of feminine demands in terms of appetite and apparel. In one article in the series, written in 1872, the author addresses Yankee women who include too many scrumptious pies with crusts half lard and half butter in their diet. Her advice was for those women to pick up a cookery book by a Professor Blott, who offered indispensable instructions how to maintain one's weight and, by association, one's attractive figure. While the author of this piece suggests that many American women ate too much fatty food, it is important to remember that the article was intended for the unsightly, those to whom Harper's wanted to give the chance and the tools to reform. This approach was not intended to undercut the position dating back to the 1830s that the average American woman was svelte and that this was a preferable form of embodiment. Almost read the wrong word there. Such was made clear in the 1877 article, Our Women Growing Plump. The author writes, Europeans generally conclude that our American women are handsome, adding that continental observers particularly remark on the tendency of our women to grow thin with years, while we remark the tendency of theirs to the accumulation of flesh as soon as they have passed their youth, and often before that period. If there was any question as to which was preferred, the author makes it clear that the slenderness typical of women in the United States was preferable to the heaviness too often found in Europe. While we must allow that our women are, for the most part, lacking in roundness, there are few of us, we imagine, who would not infinitely prefer the New World's slenderness to the Old World's stoutness. The author of this essay concedes that American women who had taken the svelte ideal a bit too far in the 1840s during the height of the Irish Catholic immigration and the early years of the promotion of the new Anglo-Protestant thin ideal. Little more than a quarter of a century ago, young American women were ashamed to show a hearty appetite in the public. They were infected with the Byronic philosophy. They wanted to be spiritual and to look elegantly wretched. Many of them had half their wish. They looked wretched, but not elegant. However, according to the author, this ethereal over-refinement had recently been rehabilitated. By the time of his writing in 1877, a healthy, sleek figure was being cultivated in America. The scrawny, sallow, peaked woman of the past was disappearing. The new woman would be comelier and rounder. Nevertheless, these new American women were not likely to become gross and obese, as so many of their European sisters, but would instead aim for a vigorous leanness and not a Byronic peaked sickliness, referring to the gaunt British romantic poet Lord Byron. Byronic is really what we of my generation knew as heroin chic. It's Byronic, don't you think? Under Booth's direction, let me try that again, too. Under Booth's direction, Harper's Bazaar reproduced similar ideas regarding weight, race, and aesthetics to those that would have been found in Godey's Lady's book. Harper's reflected a kindred preoccupation with the right models of beauty, which were based on one's race and class status. For this reason, the magazine denounced the fatness of the, in quotes, savage races, and exalted the more streamlined aesthetic of the Germans. Ooh, there we go. Getting the Germans involved. We know this is going to end up somewhere good, he said, sarcastically. This sentiment was to be found in the 1879 article titled The Fixed Facts of Beauty. In it, the author informs readers that it is idle to say that the laws of beauty are not fixed, that because the Turk sees beauty only in those obese and certain of the savages in the deformed, that therefore the laws of beauty are arbitrary, betraying a none too subtle influence of English thinkers in the hierarchy of beauty implied here, placing Turks and certain of the savages near the bottom. It is positively Shakespearean. And the writer's reference to the Turk's fondness for the voluptuous women may be another nod to Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, whose Turkish letters were widely read and by educated American women of the 19th century. Instead of accepting the Turkish folly for what is termed obesophilia, the author asserts, we must demand that the taste be formed on the correct models and approved by the most enlightened thought concerning which there can be but one opinion. More to the point, the author adds, one is not free in choice of form or outline, not only because it will be universally admitted that what the most advanced, educated, and refined race of any period has fixed as proper must be accepted as such by those who are still in a lower state of advancement, but because the principles governing the form have been reduced to a science. Ooh. Making the false appeal to science of beauty, basically. In terms of which race was suited to offering the best models of mankind, the author points to the ancestral kin of Anglo-Saxons. Germans have paid renewed attention to the matter and after patient research and trial have announced a rule, which the author claims is the basis of true beauty. The verdict is that a woman must have some fat to avoid the scrawniness of the reform years, and yet beauty is to be found only in women where delicacy and littleness cause emotions of tenderness and protection, taking them to the admiration of beauty. I don't think I need to point out what's really, really wrong there. I mean, really wrong there. What that idea of, I'm going to go ahead and point it out anyway. The problem with that is, it's infantilizing. And it's reinforcing infantilization to the point where it's creating a social framework around beauty being childlike. Which is not good. That leads a very bad place. That leads a very bad direction. So yeah, that is really disturbing. These sentiments were found in other articles from the area. An essay in Harper's titled Standard of Beauty states it would be hard to establish any standard of beauty for the whole world and call it fixed. For neither African savages don't like that, nor the Turkish seraglio who stuffs herself till she is rolling in folds of fat, can understand the cultured beauty prized by the elevated races. According to the author, what is held to be beauty by the most refined and intellectual of the world must be nearer the real article than anything accepted by a lower order of beings. mirroring ideas that had been promoted by mirroring ideas that had been promoted by German naturalist Johann Blumenbach, who popularized the term Caucasian near the turn of the century. The author proclaims Circassian women the most beautiful of all. Originating from the Caucasus Mountains, these women offered the epitome of trim, refined beauty. The Circassian race, who takes the Greek type as their model, with its slow and delicate curves, its perfect lines and slender elegance, have certainly something in their eye very different from the African races who want bulging and bountiful flesh. The author here goes so far as to reimagine the legacy of a classical Greek ideal, refashioning it oddly as the foundation of the slender aesthetic. In this way, the piece works to bolster the relationship between race and weight. Much like Godey's lady's book before it, Harper's promulgated the inferiority of African and Turkish races, said to delight in bulging folds of flesh, and it simultaneously claimed the superiority of trim white people. Mary Louise Booth died in 1889 at the age of 57. The woman recruited to take over the leadership of the magazine was a poet named Margaret Elizabeth Sangster, who had much in common with Booth. The new editor was only 7 years Booth's junior and was a fellow author and native New Yorker. One notable difference between the two, however, was that Sangster's father, though born in England, had been raised in Ireland. In her autobiography, Sangster explains that her father left the country at the age of 18, landing first in Canada in 1804, and then by 1810 in New York. Somewhere along the line, he had left behind a wife and a son, who would later take Sangster's mother, the Scottish-descended Margaret Chisholm, as his second wife. Margaret Chisholm was described by her daughter as having hair a real dark red and the Titan hue, as an extremely beautiful girl. Her figure was always slight. As might be expected from Sangster's autobiography under her editorship, Harper's Bazaar continued the racially inflected emphasis on slenderness mixed with fat bashing that women's magazines had long been serving up. The work of a woman named Edith Bigelow, titled "The Sorrows of the Fat," was featured in an issue from 1897, and provides evidence of this ongoing trend, describing the plight of large-bodied women who, in the face of tremendous odds, might hope to dress fashionably, Bigelow writes, "There are many stout women in the world. They must all be clothed. These two statements are incontrovertible, yet whoever invents appropriate clothing for them?" Rather than being an ally or empathizer, Bigelow suggests that this toxic state of affairs was the fault of the fat women themselves, referring to fatness as a crime and a deformity. She continues, "Fatness is a most undesirable state. It is dangerous to the vital organs, and it is destructive of vanity. I say that to be fat, to be, oh, awful word, obese, is to be miserable." Throughout her indictment, Bigelow italicizes the word obese to remind the reader of the severity of the situation. The stout lady of 35 has to remain stout. It is her nature, her heredity, possibly, and all she can hope for is not to become obese. That is the state part. That is the state all persons of refinement must shun. In this piece, the classical standard of beauty becomes once again the foil, reversing course on the ideal previously printed in Harper's that Venus was the foundation of the slender ideal. Bigelow's article is reminiscent of the assessment in Godey's Lady's book that Venus would have been a little too chubby for the modern aesthetic sensibility. Of the new model in fashion, Bigelow writes, "Venus herself couldn't fashion those bodices. Couldn't fasten. Venus herself couldn't fasten those bodices. And if she wore stays, they would have to be made to order. If," Bigelow concludes, "a lady wanted to be both fat and fashionable, she would have to repair not only an earlier historical moment, but to distant parts of the world. Only uncivilized savage world of Africa could a big girl be prized as a beauty, and therefore a fat society lady will not be a social success unless she burnt cork herself, donned beads, and then go to that burning clime where women like pigs are valued at so much a pound." Wow. Yeah, Circassian, Cardassian. It really feels like it. Blumenbach is one of the world's worst physical anthropologists. That does not surprise me after hearing what he said. Good to see you, Maddie. Thanks for being here. So, what do you know about Blumenbach? Being that this would be in your Caucasian was the nicest of the racial groupings. Yeah. And the original had worse endings. Okay. Okay. He's the founder of physical anthropology. Where had we had mentioned him? Yeah, from Alright. Alright. Oh, don't do that. There we go. Alright. Jonathan Friedrich Blumenbach. German medical doctor, naturalist, psychologist, and anthropologist. He's considered to be the main founder of zoology and anthropology as comparative scientific disciplines. Oh, he was the founder of the racial classifications. Yeah. Okay. I feel like we must have talked about him earlier in this book. I must just have forgotten that it was him that we were talking about. He was one of the first to explore the study of the human beings as an aspect of natural history. His teachings in comparative anatomy were applied to the classification of human races, which claimed there were 5: Caucasian, Mongolian, Malayan, Ethiopian, and American. Oh, that's just... He's considered a pivotal figure in the development of physical anthropology. Also known as physical anthropology, is natural science concerned with the biological and behavioral aspects of human beings, their extinct hominin ancestors, and non-human... Okay, see... Yeah, the 5 races. Um, okay. The Caucasian or white race, Blumenbach was the first to use this term for Europeans, but the term would later be reinterpreted, also included Middle Easterners and South Asians. That is interesting. Mongolian, all East Asians. Malayan is the South Asian Pacific Islanders, Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders, and Ethiopian are the black races, including sub-Saharan Africans, and American are the Native Americans. All of the... I mean, the idea behind... The idea behind putting... let's go ahead and read what they say about racial anthropology, just to be completist here. Blumenbach explored alleged racial differences in humans, mainly by comparing skull anatomy and skin color. His work included a description of 60 human crania, published originally in fascicules as Decus Cranorium. This was founding work for the other scientists in the field of craniometry. Similar to phrenology, craniometry, but not the same. He established a 5-part naming system in 1795 to describe what he called Generis Humani Veritates Quaenea Principes. Species Vero Unica. 5 principal varieties of humankind, but 1 species. In his view, humans could be divided into varieties. Only in his later work he adopted the term races, which had been introduced by others, but he was aware that a clear separation was difficult. That's interesting as well. All national differences in the form and color of human body run so insensibly by so many shades and transitions one into the other that it is impossible to separate them by any but very arbitrary limits. I think that's kind of telling. I think that's kind of interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's some good background there, Matty Holmes. Thank you. And we'll see if, of course, if this sticks in my memory at all, because, you know, my memory. Well, all right, friends. I do believe we have reached the end of stream today. Being that it is a, it's a depressing Tuesday. So thank you everyone for being here. Stick around for the raid. Thank you, Maddie Holmes. Thank you, Just Me Crystal. Thank you, Jadzia Dex. Thank you, Lockpick. Thank you, Darth Dragonis. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And now is the time on the show when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all.